This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff Mosher, you can listen to the Inside the Birds podcast on all podcasting platforms and on their YouTube channel. Just search Inside the Birds. And, of course, Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni just finished up. So we've got a lot to talk about. But maybe the biggest story of all, Moshe, happened in the middle of the press conference. Vic Fangio has parted ways with the Miami Dolphins. The top target for the Eagles happened in the middle of the press conference. So I would have to imagine that's why the press conference was delayed by a half an hour. Is Vic Fangio the next defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles?
I mean, Vic Fangio was in the building with them and would have been the defensive coordinator had Jonathan Gannon accepted a job or even been interviewed, right, for the Cardinals head coaching job before the Super Bowl, before Vic Fangio had taken the Miami Dolphins job. So obviously he's a guy that was hanging around with the Eagles as a consultant for a reason, and he was considered a successor if they were to lose Gannon. You heard Nick Sirianni in the press conference today, asked about it. I think Nick was being respectful to those he's interviewed and still probably plans to interview and didn't want to say, yeah, we're going to hire Vic Fangio, but I'm still going to go through all these interviews, or he's been the guy all along, and negate what interviews he's already done. But you would have to imagine that Vic Fangio would be at the top of their list. Does that mean it is 100% without a doubt, lockdown, done deal? I'm not there yet, Mike. I think I have to have both him and Howie and Jeffrey and Julie and everybody involved have to have serious discussions about what type of defense they have the personnel for and what type of defense they want to be. They certainly have the personnel to run a Fangio-style defense because they've been doing it for 4 years now, but they haven't always had the greatest success with it. And even when they were good 2 years ago under Gannon, there were issues at times against good quarterbacks, and they've kind of lost their way as an attacking defense, Mike, a downhill-style defense that really gets into the quarterback. So I think that's probably going to be a discussion to make sure that they still have the same vision now that they did a year ago when they have brought Vic in as their defensive coordinator if he was available.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what we need to reaffirm for the listeners. Vic Fangio is going to run the same defensive style. He might have better concepts, a better grasp of it because many people run his style of defense. He's kind of the guy who created this style of defense. But you would probably be getting the best in the business of that style. And if you want to keep that style, it's probably the guy to get.
Yeah. I mean, it's called the Fangio defense because it's his defense, right? And everybody is out there sort of copycatting it, much like people are trying to copycat the Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan schemes with their disciples. Here, you don't need the disciple. You got the guy. But again, I do think that there have to be, and there will be, conversations about whether or not this style of defense, which is new to the Eagles, if you look at the big history of what they do. For the longest time, whether it was Jim Johnson or, anybody else, Doug Peterson had Jim Schwartz, right? For a long time, the Eagles have been a 4-3, Buddy Ryan, 4-3 or his 4-6 style defense, whatever you want to call it. But they've been a 4-3 defense with occasional, like the 3-year Chip Kelly experiment. That was a 3-4, but they've generally been that way. The Fangio defense really started with Jonathan Gannon and Nick Sirianni just 3 years ago. So you don't know how married to this scheme and concept that guys like Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie want to be for the long haul after seeing the results of it for the last 3 or 4 years, which have been mixed.
True. I guess, they've been mixed. They had some success with Jonathan. A lot of people didn't like it, but they were the number 2 defense in the league, got them there. And obviously, we'll see. But the Vic Fangio news, I thought, obviously, that came out of nowhere in the middle of the press conference. I mean, for God's sakes, it almost, you're just like, you're hoping that the people in the room would be able to see that this news got out there, why this was happening. Some of the other stuff. I mean, Nick, he gets asked about the offensive coordinator. What did you get from his answer on the coordinator? Is this coordinator going to get to run his offense, Nick's offense, or our offense?
I wonder if you got a similar read, because I was sort of impressed with Nick because he didn't hold back. I mean, he was very forthcoming that the new offensive coordinator will be the play caller, will be bringing in a scheme, will be bringing in concepts, and that Nick will be a CEO head coach who might even step into more defensive meetings, right? And I thought that was probably tough for Nick to sort of have to admit, kind of maybe a little emasculating, like I'm really not going to be involved as much as I have been in the past in the offense. However, there were just little drops when Nick talked about like, yeah, and then they're going to mesh. This guy is going to mesh his concepts and what he brings with the things that we did well the last 3 years. And, you know, if you know coaches, Mike, and you do, they're always a little stubborn. They always want to cling to, you know, some of their process, right? And so it sounded like Nick was like 95%. Yes, this person is the play caller. It's their scheme. It's what they want to do. It's got to work. Oh, but this person's probably going to, you know, run some of the stuff that we've done well with over the last 3 years. He couldn't let that part go, but I get it. I actually thought he was more accountable and more, I guess, adjustable than what I heard from Howie Roseman.
All right, explain that. What did you think that Roseman wasn't willing to budge on?
Yeah, well, I mean, Roseman was twice asked about the personnel, the defense, and the 53.
He only
overall,
called
right?
one guy out by name the whole day, and he gave huge praise for Nakobe Dean.
Gave huge praise for Nakobe Dean, and by gosh, was Zach Cunningham, was he not one of their best linebackers, Mike? I mean, like that he throws that in as if people don't realize, well, that's a guy that you signed in like the middle of training camp. That's not a great thing that he winds up being your best linebacker. That probably shows you where you were at linebacker. But it was in the middle of that sort of question about the personnel where, yeah, he sort of talked about, well, Nakobe Dean got hurt. It wasn't as if Nakobe Dean was, when he was playing at some all-pro level either. And then in his first chance to talk about it, it wasn't really until the end of his comment did he say, I'm responsible for that, or I accept the accountability for that. So it seemed to me like he had some rationale in his mind for why things weren't great and it wasn't bad personnel. And I don't know if you heard Zach Berman's question at the end of the press conference where he was asking about the overall 53. And he said, hey, look, what we do defensively has always been, you know, our way of doing it. And if you're ahead, that's good. If you're behind, it's like leftover trash, right? So he basically doubled down on saying we're always trying to be ahead. We have our process. He talked about having the right process, having the right vision, and then the kicker came, Mike. He said, and making sure you don't overreact to something that might be an aberration at the moment. And I don't know if he was speaking generally or specifically about this last year, but if his point was we can't overreact to the aberration of our 2023 defense, I would say, I mean, I think that there's a disconnect between perception and reality. I mean, that wasn't a good defense because of personnel, first and foremost. I mean, yes, the coaching comes into evolve and they figured out every way to make it worse, right? But
well, they're in a weird spot, Moshe, with this conversation here. Let's peel the onion off a little bit here because, all right, I'm Roseman. Is it an aberration? I've got Slay and Bradbury still signed. I've got Byard still signed, although I guess they can, you know, get some money back for him. Blankenship is back. Dean, he called out, and so it seems that he's a part of their plans. Sounds like a lot of the same guys right now when he's saying this. Now, in the back of his mind, is he saying, I got to figure out a way to get out of the Bradbury situation? We're going to get rid of Byard. I don't know, but today, as his contracts sit, he better hope it was an aberration.
Yeah. I mean, I am under no belief that he's just going to run it back with like 90% of these guys. You know, I can believe that he believes in Nakobe Dean and that if Nakobe Dean comes back healthy, he believes that will be a really important part of the interior of the defense and they can get another linebacker. That secondary though needs work. You talked about the safeties right there, the corners, the nickels. I mean, that secondary definitely needs an overhaul, and let's not act like the front four, or the pass rush, I should say, was perfect either. We saw Josh Sweat really regress over the second half of the season. Some people think that, even guys who watch the tape say he's dragging his leg. That's not a good thing. We saw Jalen Carter really not play that well down the stretch. We saw Jordan Davis. We heard Jordan Davis admit in his exit interviews with the media that his play really fell off as well. I mean, Hassan Reddick was consistent. Milton Williams, I thought, was good, but this was not the same kind of ferocious pass rush from 2 years ago. So there's work to be done here.
Are you buying at all that Roseman answered the question on how the Desai firing went down? Do you take that at face value, that this was Sirianni going to him and making the suggestion? You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry about that.
Go ahead.
Only the people who are in that room really know, but our information was that it was a Nick Sirianni was all for it, was part of it. Our information on Inside the Birds was that Howie Roseman had some questions go even before was asking questions about what was going wrong with the defense. It felt very collaborative when I looked into it, that these two guys were on the same page.
I guess the question would be then, does it matter to you who made the decision? Because to me, I think it does put a ding against Nick. If that's his decision, it kind of shows that he made a knee-jerk reaction that was completely wrong.
Well, I agree with you. I do think it says a lot about both Nick and Howie. I mean, but I feel like I already knew that with Howie and Jeffrey, there's always a little bit of a panic button push. I always say with them that the panic button is halfway pushed. I mean, these guys talk about their patience with Andy Reid, which they were, but they really don't have a track record of patience with anybody else. Some deserve, some not deserve, and certainly not with coordinators, right? I mean, coordinators and position coaches are hired and fired through the Eagles probably as much, if not more, than any other team, especially teams with winning records. I mean, these guys are constantly run in and out of here, in and out of here. They're not ever given a chance to rectify wrongs. Like they're just, and then you just saw it again, as you're talking about with Desai and Matt Patricia. So the fact that Nick kind of is involved in that kind of culture is probably not a good thing either, and supported it and may have been the driving force behind it. Is not good, because Nick Sirianni has said, like many head coaches say, Mike, Nick Sirianni says, when you encounter adversity, you have to double down on what you do well and what you know to be right, your process. Because eventually, if you're convicted in that process and it's worked for you in the past, it will work for you again, even when you have adversity. Well, he did not double down on anything with his defense when he just pulled the rug out underneath his coordinator at the sign of adversity. So that, to me, is a little bit hypocritical.
Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast. All right, let's Cliff Kingsbury reported to have met with the team. Mike Garafolo, the hat tip to him. Former Arizona Cardinals head coach. He spent last year in college. Does Cliff Kingsbury do anything for you? Does it make sense?
I don't want to hold the whole Arizona tenure against him. I mean, he did go, 11-6 in his third year?
I'm not holding it against him or saying good. I'm just saying, like, does it make sense that he – and do you see that he would be a guy that would come in here and want to mesh?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that he would be a guy that the Eagles would want to come in here and run the offense, not based on anything Arizona-related, other than the fact that when he took the Arizona job, everybody said, oh, man, Cliff Kingsbury is going to come into the NFL and try to run an air raid offense, and he's going to get his quarterback killed, and he's not going to use tight ends. And all that stuff turned out to be false. Cliff Kingsbury used tight ends. He ran, push run game, gap run game. I mean, he did NFL things in the NFL. Now, whether or not he had enough personnel to be good, or whether the quarter, all that stuff is like just kind of like context to the situation. What I thought about Cliff Kingsbury was that he proved people wrong in that he did not get – I don't think his schemes got his quarterback killed. His quarterback ran a lot, obviously, and then wound up tearing his ACL. But he did have some decent offenses. He had some and he showed that he can coach at an NFL level without trying to – like the way Chip Kelly came in here and ran a college scheme, some say, and never adjusted. I don't think that was the case with Cliff Kingsbury. So he is someone I'd be interested in, and I think is an intriguing name. given his pedigree and where he's worked and who he's worked with.
All right, so Jared Johnson's interesting. Quarterback coach, right, in Houston. I just don't see how you bring in a guy who has not been a play caller. Now, this guy might be the greatest offensive coordinator ever, but what message does that send if you tell Brian Johnson, we fired you because you did a terrible job running my offense, to not say, we're going to let you mesh your concepts in, but we're going to bring in a different guy who has no play calling and give him the ability to do what he wants to do. That doesn't seem that's going to add up.
Well, this goes back to our Monday conversation where I tell people don't try to envision every single person who's interviewed for the job as that's the guy they want to be the coordinator. When the Eagles do their interviews, they typically cast a wide net, right? We talked about that on Monday. They take their time, they cast a wide net, they interview a wide variety of candidates of all different levels. And they're doing the same thing, and there's nothing wrong with fact-finding about a guy that Nick Sirianni has coached with in the past that comes from the San Francisco, now Houston system, the Shanahan-style offense, a guy who was with the Eagles. Amazingly, I feel old, in 2011 or 12, the dream team, he was a camp body quarterback. So there's nothing wrong with saying, all right, well, let's see what this guy's made of. Let's see what he thinks of play calling concepts, passing concepts, running concepts, offensive concepts, how he would do it. And maybe you get blown away and you got a guy that down the road you want to bring back in for an interview, or maybe you're blown away and think he can handle the play calling job because he did it in college. I don't know, but I don't want to, again, that's why I say fact finding and identifying a true candidate are two different things.
Yeah, I would find it to be far-fetched, as everything you said. I would find it to be far-fetched that he would be the hire, and if it was the hire, I think that's a pretty big slap in the face to Brian Johnson, for God's sakes. But would you rate his candidacy on a scale of 1 to 10? 3? Higher?
I don't want to put a number on it. I don't know who else. I mean, I've got an idea of some other names, but well, let's just see how I would say it's more unlikely than likely. Let's leave it at that.
You think Cliff Kingsbury is a very possible candidate? Or is this because you're wondering, okay, for the people listening, why Cliff Kingsbury? Where the hell did he come from? Well, he is Lincoln Riley, who Roseman is a big Riley fan. So is that a probable situation?
Well, yeah, more so, yes, than Gerard Johnson. I mean, because of what we talked about. He was the play caller for the Arizona Cardinals. Yeah. He was there for 4 years. He worked under Lincoln Riley. He worked at USC this past year, again, under Lincoln Riley. So, I mean, just the experience, the ability to have a scheme, a concept that he has ownership to and has a record of it in the NFL and he can present, I think would give him a pretty good boost there.
Yeah, and listen, because the question has kind of been like, there's veteran play callers out there. Are they going to want to come here if they don't get to run their offense? I mean, you're going to call Arthur Smith and say, hey, man, come here and run our offense, but you got to run partially my offense. And he's probably not a candidate. I don't know, is Frank Reich, who was your boss at one point, then going to say, yeah, I'll run some of your stuff? Or I mean, it's just a weird dynamic here when you're looking at these candidates, and that's why it's not his offense or my offense, it's our offense. I think I don't know. Do you feel that it clarified enough for you?
I mean, I think 90% of what Nick said was it's going to be this guy's offense, this guy's concept, this guy's scheme, this guy's calling the plays.
Okay.
But we are going to – I think it goes back again to our Monday conversation. They're not going to hire someone like Greg Roman who's going to sit there and put 3 tight ends on the field and run – with the running back 15, 20 times, then run with the quarterback 5 more times, and then grind, that. So of course, whoever they hire is going to be a dynamic passing game guy. And that's going to already mesh with Nick, who is a West Coast offense guy and who likes the passing game too. So there's just going to be a natural mesh point there. Anyway, I don't think it's going to be a force mesh where I'm making you run vertical routes, like 4 verts on a cover 2 or anything like that. It's going to be like-minded.
When you look at this press conference. How did Nick Sirianni come off to you? Did he come off of I'm in control of this team and I'm the guy? Or did he come off of Howie and Jeffrey kind of they laid into me and I'm
I mean, it's interesting how he called the end of the year meeting was
business as usual.
Business as usual.
Yeah, not that he had to go in and fight for his job. That it was just the basic. I was wondering if they were going to come off and say, "Why would we have to announce that he's coming back? He's got another year on his contract." Like I thought that would be how they wanted to try to play this.
No, they spun it differently. They said, well, Tuesday was exit interview day, or we didn't get back till really Tuesday was off day. Wednesday was exit. Then there was a snowstorm on the day after. So that's why, this is taking so long. So trust me, they got their spin in, Mike, but it was just different than we all imagined it would be. But the point I was making about business as usual is right after he said that, he pivoted into, but I'm going to reprove myself. I'm here to reprove myself. So he sort of gave the old, it's business as usual. Well, if it was business as usual, what's all this reproving myself thing coming from? He did make it sound like he knew that meeting was maybe it was business as usual, but there's no, as Andy Reid would say, we're just a little hair off. We just got to tighten it up. It sounds like Nick knew that he needed to make massive changes. And look, he's going to be even more of a CEO head coach than he's been before.
So who drops the bomb and says, all right, you got this guy and this guy, so what's your job now? I mean, Nick says, well, I'm the head coach. I mean.
That was a fun give and take.
Man, that was.
I know it's not like Nick is the only head coach in the NFL who does. I mean, John Harbaugh is in the AFC champion. They might win the Super Bowl, right? He's not an offensive coach or a defensive coach. He is the CEO head coach. Pete Carroll did it for many years too. So it's not like Nick's the only guy.
So what do? I just work here, man. I'm here so I don't get fined.
I felt like the whole Bob and Bob scene at Office Space there. Like, what would you say you actually do here? And then Nick going, I'm a people person.
All right, Geoff Mosher. I'm sure the podcast Inside the Birds is going to be a good one. Make sure you check that out. And, of course, Football at 4. Andrew was there, right? He'll be on tomorrow. He was in the building. So we'll have more updates on that. And then on a probability that Vic Fangio is hired by tomorrow.
No, I only say no because I imagine that they've been lining up other interviews and want to have some. So I think they want to see that process through. Again, fact-finding, talk to people. Vic's not going anywhere, especially if he's a Pennsylvania guy. And if he thinks that he's the top candidate, or if he's been told he's a top candidate, he's not going to go. This time, I don't think they have to worry about it like last time. So I would imagine that there'll still be some time in between. I could be wrong on that. That's just speculation on my part. But that's how I feel about it.
All right. That is Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. Thanks, bud.
You got it, man.